Welcome to Growing Pains, a podcast of the Sumner County Republican Freedom Caucus, where we explore the challenges of a thriving Sumner County. I'm your host, Diane DeWitt. Today, I am very grateful to be joined by former planning director for Sumner County, Josh Suddath. Hey, Josh.
Thank you for having me.
Good to see you again. I know you've moved on to a bigger, fancy role, and we're gonna talk about that at some point. So, but I'm glad that you still call Gallatin home, and that we have an opportunity to cross paths. So,
thanks for having me. Gallatin is home, so roots are getting deeper and deeper here all the time with the girls growing up and all that. So.
I love that. Okay, I hope we get around to talking about that. But let's start just for listeners that just might not know a lot about the planning aspects of a community. So start with, what is a planning, not just a department, but what are the planning professionals, whether it's a city or a county, what do they do to support the process of planned investments in the community?
It's really multifaceted, but the most immediate thing that they do, that professional planners do across the state, is they provide support to elected officials, your city council members, or county commissioners in a county context, and planning commission members on what you might call current planning. So site plans, plats, things that are being brought in to develop in the near term. So somebody's seeking an approval to build a new subdivision or construct a new commercial business or industrial building or something. Yeah. Those things go to the planning commission typically, and sometimes to the elected officials for an approval. Beyond that, there's rezonings where somebody's trying to change the use of a piece of property or get a variance, those kinds of things, which might go to the Board of Zoning Appeals. Bigger picture, your professional planners will help to craft those documents, the zoning documents, subdivision regulations, comprehensive plan documents that provide that vision for the community. And of course, they're not decision makers in most contexts. In general, planners, they work closely with those elected and appointed officials to craft policy, which is adopted by those officials. They decide what the policy is going to be, and what the staff does is essentially to work to ensure that the development that comes through complies with that vision and with the specifics of those plan documents.
That piece of it, just comply with what the ordinances are, ends up being a very iterative process, I think, or that was at least my perception, that a lot of times, especially in bigger developments or proposals, there's a lot of things that maybe don't come in on the front end that I witnessed in your capacity, you and your office, really just working to make sure the right things were being included, and that it was going to be a good investment.
Yeah, and when the process is working well the way that it should work, it really is a partnership between the development community and the professional staff who are accepting the application. Everybody has a different job to do, but there's usually a mutual respect there. And you're right. The developer, they have to work in a whole lot of different jurisdictions in general, and so figuring out what all they have to do can sometimes be a daunting task. And so the staff is there as a resource in general to help them get through the process.
Got it. Forgive me. Tell me your current title.
So at this time, I work for the University of Tennessee. So there's a new agency that's being established. I'm the first executive director of that agency. It's called the Center for Local Planning. And so essentially that's a new agency, a new statewide agency to provide planning support to cities and counties and development districts across the state of Tennessee.
Got it. So 95 counties?
95. There's 95 counties.
95 counties. So does that mean you have 95 sort of points of contact or are there some areas where there is no staff?
Right. So I kind of alluded to that a little while ago among the development community, going community to community or county to county. It's wildly different. And so there's across the state, there's only about half the counties in the state of Tennessee have zoning at this time. So Sumner County, for instance, has had zoning for over 50 years. But most counties in the state don't even have that, and so it's a very broad, diverse state in that regard. Definitely.
You just touched on this, that Sumner County has had zoning for a long time, but you also led efforts to refresh that zoning. Mm-hmm. That's a daunting process.
It was a big lift. The first rewrite that we did, I think that was in 2020 timeframe. The zoning code had been updated over time, but the document essentially was from the 70s, early 70s.
Pretty sure it was on a piece of paper.
It was
with some scribbles on the margins sometimes.
There were crossed out pages and chapters that were missing and had been, put in other places. And so what we did was we basically went back to the drawing board, worked with the Planning Commission and the community to redo that zoning document.
It's massive. Yeah. Massive. All right, let's go back and talk about your role now across the state. Can you touch on what maybe you see as certain mistakes or traps or things that are being repeated, especially across our faster growing counties?
Well, I don't know that there's mistakes or traps. I mean, I think that there's commonalities, in Middle Tennessee particularly, but not exclusively in Middle Tennessee. In East Tennessee, they're experiencing it as well. There's a lot of growth, and with that growth has come a lot of political change. And so there's a grappling with trying to figure out what's that vision going to be for each community is kind of asking themselves, what's our vision of ourselves? And they're having to decide that. And the way you decide that is ultimately through the planning process and what you approve and don't approve. And so I think, at this point, it's difficult to revisit plans, to get a new comprehensive plan adopted in a county jurisdiction, for instance. It's a difficult thing to do. It's always been difficult, but in the current environment, it's particularly difficult.
Well, and that it takes a skill set that I would think, is just not part of the normal day-to-day talent set that you have, whether it's elected or planning department or planning commission individuals. Now you're thinking very big picture when you try to look at a 30-year plan or whatever your goals are and envisioning the future of that community. That's a very different mindset. And I know, it just takes a different skill.
Well, and it's a political process too. And so there's not a lot of consensus anywhere nowadays. It seems like it's very difficult to arrive at a lot of consensus. And so it's on things that affect people, and there's not much that affects people more intimately than the stuff that's going on their street and their neighborhood. And so reaching a consensus on what that's going to look like and what it should look like is very difficult. It's very difficult. Well,
and whether it's citizens or elected officials, what do you think a lot of people misunderstand about the planning process and how these zoning ordinances and whatever is part of the existing framework, how does that, how that intersects with plans that are being brought to the table? What do people just misunderstand, do you think, typically?
Probably one of the things that gets misunderstood the most is that not every decision that gets made by particularly your appointed bodies, your planning commissions and boards of zoning appeals, not every decision that gets made by those bodies is what you might call discretionary. So sometimes they don't have a choice. They have to approve it because it complies with all the requirements, and there is no legal reason to deny that application. And so that's probably a huge area of misunderstanding among the public, is that there's a view sometimes that every application that comes before one of those bodies is like a rezoning that goes to an elected body. There's a lot of discretion there to approve or to deny a rezoning. But a lot of things that come before those bodies, the state legislature has just required that it must be approved at a public meeting. The applicant proves that they meet all the requirements, and the planning commission has to approve it. And so that sometimes there can be some angst over that.
And once
people
the planning,
feel like they're not being heard.
Sure. And even, a planning commission approving some of those things, that's not the end of the road. That, it does go through the elected body.
Sometimes.
And sometimes.
So if it's a zone change, so if there's a new plan unit development or a rezoning that's coming through that's going to change the use of that property. But if it's in a residential area and you're bringing in a subdivision plat with residential building lots that meets the zoning requirements, it's a planning must be decision. Approved. Yeah, it's a discretion. It's a non-discretionary approval.
What do you think distinguishes projects that are really forward thinking, that that come to the table with kind of this intersection between here's a today problem or a today opportunity that's being proposed for a specific land development, and then the intersection of what that long-term plan looks like? I don't know if you can connect the dots here, but what do you think you can say distinguishes those projects that really are thinking forward?
Typically, it's going to come from what's the developer doing. If you look at it from that perspective, projects where the developer is, when there might be, particularly on rezonings and things where the use of a property is going to change, when the developer is making commitments to mitigate that impact, whether that's through buffering or design of the lots, moving things to the center of the property, those kinds of things, sound buffers, but things like that, road improvements, public improvements that are done along with the development process. Those are forward-thinking things on the developer side. On the government side, it's where local government has a plan and sticks with it. Whether that's approving things that comply with the plan or not approving things that don't comply with the plan. And so a lot of jurisdictions in Middle Tennessee have made a lot of good advancements in that regard at coming up with plans, adopting plans, and trying to live with them.
And then stick with it.
And it's hard. It's hard to do. It's hard to stick with the plans that you made. And sometimes you have to say, well, those plans need to be revised. And so you go through that public process as well.
Yeah. But when something's on the table that fits within the parameters, that becomes a really sticky process. Legally, you can't reject it, even though you realize maybe something that's being new on the table, like, oh, we really need to change that plan. But
right. And so it's difficult to write policy based on an active application. You really have to think ahead about what you want to see, how you want to see it done, and have those plans and policies written to anticipate that and to make sure it happens.
Yeah. I've seen that you've led several efforts to modernize and update. We talked about the county plans and ordinances. What was, as you, well, I guess I was already joking about the comments in the margins and how some of those things weren't even digitized. But what made that process such a priority for you in the bigger picture? The
big picture was hard to focus on because and that was an argument that when I was standing before the county commission that I made was that, based on this document that we have, the staff really doesn't know what to do because we have an application that comes through. It's hard to tell if it complies with the regulations because they're very unclear. Yeah. And so essentially I asked for help. You may remember that. So the county commission did that at the time. And so it was good to get that help. Yeah, it was. Maybe we should touch on part of the equation of getting that help was the Greater Nashville Regional Council, if I'm not mistaken, right? Right. Tell us a little bit, listeners might not know what that is. It has a title that tends to get people a little anxious when they hear that GNRC maybe is involved in some local things, but... So GNRC's involvement in that process was on the mapping side of things. So they helped us to create the new zoning maps and those kinds of things. And so what they did really was listen to what the staff and the Planning Commission had said we wanted to see and what the County Commission ultimately adopted. And they helped us draw those maps. But to back up into your question, the Greater Nashville Regional Council is what's called a development district. And so the development districts were set up back in the 1960s by the state legislature. Essentially, they're quasi-governmental agencies. And they're really, you go across the state, there's 9 of them. They help every city and every county in the state of Tennessee with various things. And so one of the things that they help with is things like, grant administration is a big one for them. Aging and disability services, they provide a lot of those kinds of services to citizens as well, whether that's some of them will help with applying for Medicare and those kinds of things. Wow. I didn't realize that's actually very, very broad. If you have an application for a combined development block grant where maybe you're trying to do some infrastructure improvements in a more disadvantaged area, they help you with those applications as well. But they also help with planning and zoning and comprehensive plans and those kinds of things as well. Overall, like I said, we work closely with them at UT. They're a great resource, and they've always been a good resource in the different roles I've had throughout my career. Yeah. Do they attempt to make the 13-county region around Nashville all like Nashville? Is that the development district priority? They don't. My experience has always been that they get a contract with a local community and they work to produce what the community asks them to do. Has been my experience. And that's the same with the different development districts as well, whether that's Southwest Tennessee Development District in Jackson or First Tennessee Development District up in Upper East Tennessee. And so they work closely with the communities to fulfill various roles where maybe those communities don't have staffing resources to do it themselves. Right. They're kind of an extender. And I think that was the intent that the legislature had in establishing those years ago.
Well, and they bring to the table a skill set that is not going to exist in all these counties or municipalities on their own.
Right.
And that's a huge value that that we certainly don't want to overlook. But at the same time, I think it's just one of those areas of misunderstanding that I see thrown around quite often. That there's just a misnomer.
Yeah, and they help with transportation services as well, whether that's transportation planning, working to get federal funding for road improvements, road widenings, bridge improvements, those kinds of things for cities and counties. And they do that in a rural context and in the more suburban type context, like in Sumner County.
Sure. Yeah. And, just having a voice, having an entity like them to reiterate and echo the needs that maybe our community has relative to a TDOT budget and, major statewide investments are prioritized there.
Yeah. They provide that forum for all the local governments, the mayors and other officials to get together every so often and talk about the things that are the priority for their region. And so like I said, it's a way to get everybody in the same room together at the same time to have those conversations.
Well, and there's a lot of power to that kind of mindset of partnering across the region, and then bring it into Sumner County. You have all these cities that have different needs. And then having a forum for those voices to come together and look at, well, what are the priorities for Sumner County? And then that extends when you think about the broader region. But that process of kind of bringing everyone together to look at what are the priorities for this collective group, it's a process that I think people don't value how much goes into that and how much benefit there is. Yeah,
and a lot of times it's required. And so as part of the federal transportation planning process, if you want to get funding to widen 386, for instance, here in Sumner County. In order to achieve that federal funding, there's a collaborative process that's required through what's called the Metropolitan Planning Organization, MPO, and so that's within the Greater Nashville Regional Council here. And so you have to go through that process of prioritizing projects and allocating federal funding and those kinds of things. And
right.
So it's something that you do have to do.
So before you left Sumner County, there was another rezoning, or not a rezoning, but another plan that was adopted that shifted the minimum lot sizes. Mm-hmm. So could you help illuminate this topic for us? Because I think it's a pretty significant change for the county, and it has implications that I'm not sure everybody has really wrapped their heads around yet. So it's a minimum 1,000 square feet across the, how do I, I'm trying to get all my planning terminology. My dictionary is just not coming back to me, but 1,000 feet of frontage.
Not quite that. So that process was definitely an interesting process. And with a good bit of compromise there as well. So when those discussions happened around 2022 timeframe, there began to be a lot more conversations about rural preservation and how does Sumner County, a lot of conversation about maintaining the character of the county and what does that mean. And so a lot of the conversation kind of started at, some things that were maybe not legally practical. Some folks talking about like 15-acre minimum lot sizes and those kinds of things, which
I completely missed that piece of
not sure that was something. And so then the conversation evolved to, well, let's do 5 acres across the whole county or something like that. And so that evolved, and there was more of a focus on the comp plan that we had, that the county had, the 2035 comp plan. What did it say? Those kinds of things. And so eventually what emerged, and that's the thing about the planning process, is it's people talking about very complex things with a lot of emotions and those kinds of things. But eventually there was on the county commission a reasonable consensus that came out. What got adopted as part of those changes back a couple years ago was in the areas around the cities, which is the urban growth boundaries of the cities where they're allowed to annex and to grow, the minimum lot size remained unchanged. So in that area, that unincorporated portion of the county, it was 40,000 square feet. It's what it had been since the 70s, and that didn't change. In the areas outside of that, it went to 100,000 square feet. And so that's about 2.3 acres is the the
See, I
lot
knew
size
it was
there.
1,000, but it was 100,000 square feet.
100,000
That's what it
square
was.
feet. Yep. And so that was in the areas outside the urban growth boundary and the more rural parts of the county.
Right.
And there was a provision added as well that, for lots that don't have access to public water, which is a significant, I think that's changing in the process of changing, but there's a significant part of the county that historically has not had access to public water.
Right.
And there was a 5-acre minimum lot size established there. But otherwise, it was 100,000 square feet in the rural parts of the county.
Got it. Maybe just dive in a little deeper on those growth boundaries. And how does that process, the cities have a point of view and the county has a point of view. So, what are those areas? And
I could put all I could put all your listeners to sleep.
I know.
Things for sure, but I'll try to keep it at a high level. So there's back in 1998, the state legislature adopted what's called Public Chapter 1101, which is this really foundational law that established the annexation process in the state of Tennessee, sort of as we know it today. It's changed more, and I can talk about that about property owner consent here in a minute. But what that required is that every city and every county in the entire state was required to create this document. It's called a comprehensive growth plan document. What that does is it establishes urban growth boundaries around the cities so that there has to be a consensus. Everybody has to agree. The county commission, all the cities have to agree to it. That's the area that the cities are going to grow to within the next 20 years. And so Sumner County adopted that document in the year 2000. And so that established urban growth boundaries around each of the municipalities in Sumner County. Outside that, there's some planned areas in the county as well. But what gets the most focus is the urban growth boundaries. And so for many years, the cities could annex within that area by ordinance. And so essentially they would say, we're going to annex this 500 acres and we're going to notify the property owners and follow the process and do it. And they'll be in the city. In 2014, the state legislature adopted a new public act that changed that and required annexation to be by consent. So you can't annex somebody anymore unless they ask for it. And so that's the state of annexation across the state of Tennessee now. There's two ways to get annexed into the city. You either have to request it, or there has to be a referendum of the property owners in a neighborhood, let's say, that want to be annexed, and then they would have a referendum. Very rare for that one to be used across the state.
Yeah.
In general, 99+% of the annexations that occur in the state of Tennessee are initiated at the property owner's request. And so they ask to be annexed into the city, and then the city considers the annexation and conducts a vote on it.
And why would a landowner want to be annexed?
Typically, it's going to be as part of the development process. And so that they will want to attain municipal services, water, sewer, police, fire. Those are the biggies, and that for their residents as part of the annexation. And so they'll request the annexation, and then there'll be a rezoning to rezone that property appropriately to do whatever it is the developer is wanting to do.
Yeah. So I'm going to attempt to try to bring these two kind of data points together. So when you think about those growth boundaries and the benefits of being within a municipality, and then you look into those areas that are more rural, where we have the new 2.3 acre lot minimum, what are some of those true costs that, impact the size of a lot? And I think a lot of it relates to infrastructure. At least that's where I'm leading. But tell me, what do you see as that trade-off of your lot size and the cost to allow that property to continue to evolve? From
the developer's perspective, it's a for-profit business that they're in, and so they want to maximize the yield of the property that they own, and as part of the development. So they typically will try to get as many lots as they can. Within the stuff I talked about earlier, very often you'll see developers make trade-offs in terms of buffers and green space and detention facilities for stormwater and those kinds of things within the property as well. And so from the developer's perspective, of course, they want to maximize the amount of money they make on the investment they make.
Right.
From the city side, they want it, and they're required actually to, or at least there's a portion of the law that strongly recommends that they to do an annexation analysis to discuss what's this annexation going to look like?
And the cost of
how much is it going
services.
to cost to pay for it? And what services are going to be provided in the plan of service to that development? And so from the city side, they will, in order to pay for the services that are provided, they'll do a cost benefit analysis to see if the development is going to support itself or come close to supporting itself.
Right. So the probability of there ever being a subdivision outside of those growth boundaries and in the rural parts of Sumner County, where the 2.3 acre lot minimum, that's almost, I wouldn't say impossible, but that value proposition, or just the business case of the cost to provide infrastructure and safety support and all the things that would be required on those larger lot size. Have you seen those, or am I going too far in saying that that's just not a?
Well, the amount of services that get provided by the county would in general be limited to your, safety, sheriff, EMS, and the highway department,
roads,
for roads. So you don't have water, you don't have sewer, you don't have the fire department. Typically, you have the volunteer fire departments and those kinds of things. And so, as far as the tax revenue that would get generated on those per acre, if you were looking at it that way, in general, just the math is going to show that it probably would be less when you go to larger lots.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty basic math, I guess. So it's is there? Do you think that zoning is something that is pretty widely accepted as a standard for, when you look at counties like Sumner County? I know we're not the first one to adopt that kind of zoning regulation. Are you seeing where that has been a benefit, or creates unexpected consequences?
I think it's ultimately each community, as I think I said earlier, each community has to decide what it's going to be, what it wants to be. And so, as long as you're not doing something that's illegal with, depriving people of property and that kind of thing, there's not necessarily a right or wrong in those kinds of decisions. I definitely across the state, there's, as I mentioned, there's probably a development fatigue that you're seeing in a lot of places across the state of Tennessee, particularly Middle Tennessee and parts of East Tennessee. But probably some in West Tennessee as well. And so the trend has been things like you've seen in Sumner County. I think there's a number of communities that have looked at that or have done that. Williamson County is one example that probably went a little bit further than Sumner County did in a lot of ways. Wilson County has made some significant changes, and there have been others across the state as well. And so, from my more of a state perspective now, that's definitely a trend that's out there. And I don't make value judgments on that. I think each elected official they have to grapple with the reality of what they feel like they got elected to do and what their constituents are telling them that they should do.
And it's a tool to put the brakes in certain areas, or to not. So I think you've summarized that well, that it really is part of the opportunity every community has to define what they want to look like.
Try to figure that out, yeah.
So to kind of just bring this topic to a conclusion, are there any other things that you see or suggest that are valuable in terms of preserving character of a community beyond just this lot size piece of the equation? Yeah.
Well, so, and one of the things, and it might be another question that you have for me later, but, one of the things that Sumner County did that a lot of communities across the state are doing is, a couple of different ways of utilizing existing resources, basically. And so one of those is the accessory dwelling unit process. And so that's something that you see a lot more than you used to in Sumner County. I think you'd kind of ask about some problems with the old documents that we had years ago. One of them was that things like what you might call the granny flat, intergenerational housing, where you have, a garage that's converted to an accessory dwelling or something. That was just, you couldn't do it in Sumner County except through a very, very narrow process. And so with the changes in 2020, that was really opened up. Every residential lot in Sumner County has the ability to have an accessory dwelling unit on it. There are some restrictions on, rentals and those kinds of things. But it's open for anybody that might want to do that. And so that's a way you're utilizing the existing lot to provide an additional dwelling maximizing the use of your existing resources is something. And for cities, infill development, those kinds of things, redevelopment of sites that are maybe not being used to their highest and best purpose. That's another great way that you can utilize existing infrastructure, because if you've got a piece of property that's not being used for its highest and best use, maybe it's an abandoned site or something at this point, and you want to redevelop it.
Yeah.
You don't have to run new sewer lines. You don't have to run new water lines. The police are already there. Fire's already there. And so you get a lot more return on that investment sometimes than you might on a greenfield site. Now, there's a time and place for everything, and sometimes that's the right choice to make on those properties. And that's, like I said, that's where the elected officials have the job of figuring out if a particular application is the right thing for a piece of property at any given time.
Yeah.
But redevelopment of existing sites is a really great way to generate a good bit of tax revenue without a whole lot of additional outlay.
Are you seeing more of that, do you think?
Yes.
Regionally?
Yes, I think so. And a lot of it is, the annexation process is probably has gotten a good bit more difficult in some places. So I think that there's you have more, and a lot of in the planning profession, it's something that's been encouraged more, and you have planners that are steering the elected officials probably toward thinking about adopting policies that encourage that infill development and find ways to incentivize it, whether that's through more density or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's something that you see a good bit more, but there's still obviously a lot of traditional growth through annexation and neighborhoods coming in and that kind of thing as well. It's a mixed bag.
Never a dull day, is there?
Right.
I would think never a dull day in the planning department, especially in this region. And I think there's just a reality that Middle Tennessee is facing in terms of growth because of the great things that we offer. And that's why things are hopping, and there's always something being considered. And but you got to manage that, and you've got to create these guidelines that keep us moving in a direction that is healthy.
Right.
Do you see some examples that maybe we should be looking at that really have, in your opinion, gotten growth right and creating these parameters that and maybe it's not even in the state of Tennessee. I don't know how far you...
I don't know that I can hold up any examples of ones that have done it right versus, some other county doing it wrong. But I think, the what I learned in my time in local government is that the more you talk and interact and engage with those other elected officials or appointed officials, city staff members in other jurisdictions, the more you learn about the problems that they're facing. And you realize there's nothing new under the sun, but sometimes people have a novel way of approaching, those issues. And so that's something for me that always was a big part of any success that I had was reaching outside of my immediate circle to get new ideas and think about ways of handling these issues, because other folks, what you quickly learn is that we're all facing the same problems in one way or another. Yeah. And so engaging with other people to get outside perspectives is a huge way to deal with it.
Well, I don't know if that's the only or best example, but I'm going to use that as a trigger to just tell you, and I told you I want to elevate your brilliance to the surface here, because I do believe that serving as our planning director for as long as you did, and weathering through some of the challenges and the opportunities to adopt these things that are going to continue to guide us through the future was incredibly valuable. And I do believe, this is, my humble opinion, that you are one of the greatest assets to Sumner County in the capacity you serve. So sorry, just keep smiling and dealing with the compliments. But
this is good. Keep it coming. I'm loving this.
You left a mark, and so I am personally grateful for that, and I'm also very happy for the state of Tennessee to have someone with your wisdom and your ability to bring these different factors to the table and to the equation to get it right. And so I'm grateful that Tennessee has the opportunity to benefit from your insight. So
thank you. It was very rewarding working in Sumner County. And I have to say, across administrations and county commissions, and, it was immensely rewarding during my time at Sumner County to always feel valued. And for my staff to always feel valued by the county commission and the planning commissions that we work with, it made coming to work. It can be challenging for everybody that's in the planning field. It's a difficult job, but knowing that the work that we were doing was valued and appreciated was very special.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on. So thank you, Josh. I appreciate your time, and maybe we'll get together again and talk about some new things. When the administration changes, maybe you'll have some new advice.
Anytime, I'm happy to come and bore your listeners again.
No. Have a great one. Thank you for joining us.